The perfect mother. In-law had a secret that would destroy my family. I thought I was walking into the happiest day of my life when my grandson was born, but instead, I walked into a trap set 30 years ago. If you think you know your family, think again. The woman standing in the shadows of the hospital wing had been planning this moment since before my daughter was even born. Watch until the end to see how a silver rattle became the key to uncovering a lifetime of lies. Before we get into the heart of this story, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a narrative. I want to hear from you in the comments. If someone from your past reappeared after 30 years, would you trust them or would you keep one eye open? Let me know what you think is going to happen next. I stood in the spacious lobby of the Mercy Private Medical Center, my fingers tracing the intricate engravings on the sterling silver Tiffany rattle in my pocket. It was a heavy piece, cool to the touch, and carried the weight of 4 generations of my family. My great-grandfather had bought it in New York City at the turn of the century, and it had been shaken by the tiny hands of my grandfather, my father, and me. I had polished it every night for a week leading up to this day, imagining the moment I would hand it to my daughter Abby for her new son. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all polished granite and soaring glass walls that looked out over a manicured garden. It smelled of expensive lilies and that sharp, underlying scent of high-end antiseptic that only the wealthiest clinics seemed to possess. I felt out of place in my worn corduroy jacket, but I didn't care. I was a grandfather now. My heart felt larger than my chest could contain. The automatic glass doors hissed open, and I saw Abby. She was pale, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, wearing a hospital gown covered by a thick fleece robe. I started to move toward her, a smile already forming on my face, but I stopped when I saw her expression. It wasn't the look of a new mother exhausted by labor. It was the look of someone who had just witnessed a tragedy. "Leave, Dad." Her voice was thin, trembling, but there was a hardness in it I had never heard before. She didn't take a single step toward me. She stayed behind a line in the tile work, as if there were an invisible wall between us. "Abby, honey, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I have the rattle. I have the flowers. I thought we were going to—" "You are no longer part of this family," she interrupted, her voice gaining a cold, brittle strength. "Forget this address and forget my number. Forget you even have a grandson. You are not getting anywhere near my son. Not today, not ever." I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Just a month ago, we were sitting in that coffee shop on the corner of Main Street, laughing as we flipped through a nursery catalog. We had picked out a crib together. She had told me I was the only person she could truly rely on after her mother passed away. Now, she was looking at me with a mixture of fear and pure, unadulterated loathing. Behind her, deep in the shadows of the hallway where the light from the lobby didn't quite reach, I saw the silhouette of another woman. She was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, her silver hair styled in a sharp professional bob. It was Eleanor, the mother of Abby's husband, Mark. She stood near a tall, weeping fig plant, her arms folded across her chest. She didn't come forward to offer comfort or to explain. She simply stood there, a faint, triumphant smile playing on her thin lips. She watched my humiliation with the detached interest of someone watching a play they had written themselves. The security guard, a man half my age with shoulders too wide for his uniform, stepped toward me. "Sir, you need to leave. The patient has made her wishes clear." I looked at Abby one last time, searching for a glimmer of the daughter I had raised alone since she was 6 years old. There was nothing, just a hollow, frozen stare. I turned and walked out through the hissing glass doors, the silver rattle feeling like a lead weight in my pocket. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 3 hours watching the entrance. I didn't cry. I was too old for that kind of release. Instead, I felt a slow, cold dread beginning to coil in my stomach. I had been a high school principal for 35 years. I knew when a student was lying, and I knew when someone was being bullied. Abby wasn't acting of her own volition. She was terrified. When I finally drove home to my quiet house on the edge of town, the silence felt deafening. I sat at my kitchen table, the silver rattle placed in the center of the wood, and I thought about Eleanor. I had only met her a handful of times since Abby and Mark got married 3 years ago. She was always polite, if a bit distant, the kind of woman who used her wealth and status as a shield. She lived in a massive colonial-style home in an upscale zip code 3 towns over, a pillar of her community, a philanthropist, a woman of impeccable standing. But there was something about that smile in the hospital hallway. It wasn't the smile of a concerned grandmother. It was the smile of a victor. I went to my basement and pulled out a dusty cardboard box labeled University Days. I hadn't opened it in decades. I sat on the concrete floor and began to dig through old photos, programs from theater productions, and yearbooks. I was looking for a ghost. And then I found it. A black and white photo from a senior formal. I was standing in a tuxedo, looking young and naive. Beside me was a girl with dark, intense eyes and a grip on my arm that looked a little too tight. Her name was Lori. Lori had been my shadow during my senior year. She was brilliant, beautiful, and deeply, dangerously obsessive. She had decided we were soulmates before our second date. When I tried to break things off to pursue the woman who would eventually become my wife, Lori didn't just cry. She went on a campaign of destruction. She called my dorm room at all hours. She wrote letters that filled my mailbox, pages upon pages of threats and pleas. She told me that if she couldn't have me, she would make sure I never knew a day of peace. I had forgotten her, or rather, I had buried her. After graduation, I moved across the state, married my late wife, Sarah, and built a life. Lori had vanished. I heard rumors she had a breakdown, that her family moved her away. I never thought of her again. I looked at the photo of Lori. Then I pulled up a photo of Eleanor from a recent local news article about a charity gala. The jawline was the same. The way she held her shoulders was the same. The eyes, though now surrounded by the fine lines of age, still held that same terrifying intensity. Lori had changed her name, changed her life, and waited 30 years. She hadn't just moved on. She had tracked me. She had found out I had a daughter. And then, with the surgical precision of a master architect, she had ensured that her son, Mark, would meet my Abby. Their entire romance, their marriage, the birth of my grandson, it was all a long-distance hit. I spent the next 2 days like a ghost myself. I didn't go to the grocery store. I didn't answer the phone. I watched. I drove to Eleanor's neighborhood and parked a block away from her estate. I saw Abby's car in the driveway. Through the large front windows, I could see them in the living room. Eleanor was holding the baby. Abby was sitting on the sofa, her head in her hands. Eleanor was talking to her, gesturing with a thick manila folder. Every time Eleanor spoke, Abby seemed to shrink. It was clear now. This wasn't just about a 30-year-old grudge. Eleanor had something on my daughter, something she was using to keep her in line, something that was powerful enough to make a daughter turn her back on the father who had raised her. I realized then that I couldn't just walk up to the door and demand answers. If I did that, Eleanor would simply close the curtains. I was dealing with a woman who had spent 3 decades simmering in her own resentment, a woman who had used her own son as a pawn in a game of revenge. To save Abby and my grandson, I would have to be just as patient, just as calculated, and twice as ruthless. I went back to my car and started the engine. I knew a private investigator, a former student of mine named Miller. He owed me a favor from 20 years ago when I helped him stay in school after a bad run-in with the law. It was time to collect. The investigation took a week. Every hour felt like a month. I spent my nights staring at that silver rattle on the kitchen table, wondering if it would ever feel the touch of my grandson's hand. Miller called me on a Tuesday night, his voice low and professional. "Mr. Henderson, you were right to call me," Miller said. "Your daughter's mother-in-law is a piece of work. But it's not just her. I found out what's in that folder she's been carrying around." "What is it?" I asked, my heart hammering. "Your daughter made a mistake about 5 years ago," Miller explained. "Before she met Mark, she was working at that high-stakes law firm downtown. The pressure was immense. She got caught up in a prescription fraud ring. Not as a leader, but she signed off on some things she shouldn't have to help a friend. It never went to trial because she resigned and the firm hushed it up to protect their reputation. But the records exist. Eleanor found them. In this state, with those documents, Eleanor could have Abby disbarred in 24 hours. More importantly, she could use it to prove Abby is an unfit mother and take that baby away." The room felt like it was spinning. My sweet, brilliant Abby had been carrying this secret alone, and Eleanor had stepped on it like a trap. "She gave her an ultimatum, didn't she?" I whispered. "Exactly," Miller said. "Cut the father out, or the documents go to the district attorney and the CPS. Eleanor wants you to feel exactly what she felt 30 years ago. She wants you to be the one left behind, forgotten and alone, while she raises your flesh and blood." I thanked Miller and hung up the phone. I sat in the dark for a long time. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was ice cold. It was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Eleanor thought she was the only one who knew how to play a long game. She thought her wealth and her folder made her untouchable. But she had forgotten one thing. I was the one who had survived her once before, and I knew her better than she realized. I looked at the silver rattle. It was time to stop being the victim in Eleanor's play. It was time to write a new ending. I spent the next few days gathering my own documents. I didn't look for legal records. I looked for the things that define a person's soul. I went back to the attic. I called old college acquaintances. I even tracked down a retired professor who lived in a nursing home 3 states away. I was building a different kind of folder. I knew Eleanor was planning a 1-month celebration for the baby. It was going to be a grand affair at her estate, filled with the town's elite. She wanted to showcase her perfect family, her perfect grandson, and her perfect victory over the man who had rejected her. I would be there. I wouldn't be invited, but I would be there. And I wouldn't be coming for an apology. I was coming for an extraction. As I prepared my suit for the evening, I thought about the 30 years of silence between us. Eleanor had spent that time building a fortress of lies. I was going to walk through the front door and bring the whole thing down with a single truth. I put the silver rattle in my pocket one last time. It was no longer just a gift. It was a weapon. The night of the party arrived, a clear, crisp autumn evening. The kind of night where sound travels for miles. I pulled my car up to the edge of the estate, watching the gleaming SUVs and luxury sedans line the driveway. The house was lit up like a palace, music drifting out over the lawn. I walked toward the gate, my heart steady. I wasn't afraid. For the first time since that day in the hospital, I felt at peace. I knew exactly what I had to do. Stay tuned for part 2. Where I step into the lion's den and reveal the secret Eleanor thought she had buried 30 years ago. The dinner party is about to become a crime scene of the heart, and not everyone is going to walk away with their reputation intact. Do you think I'm being too reckless by showing up uninvited, or is this the only way to save my daughter? Don't go anywhere. The real drama is just beginning. Imagine walking into a room full of people who have been told you are a monster, knowing you are the only one holding the truth that could set them all free. I stood at the threshold of Eleanor's grand dining room, my hand gripping the silver rattle in my pocket like a talisman, ready to burn her 30-year lie to the ground. If you think the betrayal was bad, the truth is far more twisted. Keep watching, because the mask is about to slip in front of everyone Eleanor holds dear. Before we dive into the second part of this confrontation, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We bring you the most intense stories of family drama and justice every single day. Leave a comment below with the word justice if you believe that no secret can stay buried forever. Do you think the daughter will choose her father or the woman holding the folder over her head? Let us see who can predict the twist. The colonial estate was glowing under the moonlight, a monument to the success and refinement Eleanor had spent 3 decades manufacturing. I could hear the clinking of crystal and the low murmur of polite laughter as I walked up the stone path. I did not ring the bell. I knew the side garden door was usually left unlocked for the caterers during these large events. I walked through the shadows of the hedges, my heart a steady drumbeat in my ears. I was not a man of violence, but I was a man of justice. And tonight, the truth was going to be my gavel. I entered through the kitchen. The staff was busy plating miniature desserts, and in my suit I looked like just another guest who had taken a wrong turn. I moved past them into the main dining hall. The room was breathtaking, filled with the town's most influential figures, all gathered to celebrate the arrival of the newest heir to the Eleanor name. At the center of the long mahogany table sat Eleanor, looking every bit the queen of her domain. To her right was my daughter, Abby, looking like a ghost in a silk dress. To her left was Mark, her son, beaming with the pride of a new father. I did not wait for an introduction. I walked directly to the foot of the table. The conversation died instantly, the silence spreading like ink in clear water. Eleanor's face did not change at first. She was a professional. She simply put down her wine glass and looked at me with a cold, inquisitive tilt of her head. "Arthur," she said, her voice smooth and dangerous, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding. This is a private family gathering." I looked at Abby. She had turned even paler, her eyes darting toward the leather folder that sat on a sideboard behind Eleanor. She was trembling. Her hands gripped tightly under the table. She looked at me with a silent plea to leave, to save myself, to save her secret. I gave her a small, reassuring nod. "It is a family gathering, Eleanor," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "And since I am the grandfather of that child, and the father of the woman you are currently holding hostage with a pack of lies, I figured my seat was already warm." Mark stood up, his face flushing with confusion and a bit of anger. "Mr. Henderson, what is going on? Abby said you were taking some time away. She said you weren't ready to be a grandfather." I looked at Mark, a young man who had been groomed his entire life to believe his mother was a saint. "Mark, I like you. You have been a good husband to my daughter. But you need to know that your entire life, including your marriage, has been a stage play written by the woman sitting next to you." Eleanor laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Arthur is clearly unwell," she told the guests, who were now whispering and leaning in. "The stress of losing his wife and now the excitement of the baby. It has been too much for him. Security will be here in a moment to help him home." I pulled the first item from my inner coat pocket. It wasn't a legal document. It was a photograph, enlarged and printed on high-quality paper. I slid it down the long table. It came to rest right in front of Mark. It was the photo of me and Lori from 30 years ago, her eyes wide and possessive, her hand clawing at my arm. "That is your mother, Mark," I said. 30 years ago, her name was Lori. She was a woman who spent a year trying to destroy my life because I did not love her back. She swore she would find a way to take everything from me. She changed her name. She moved states. And she waited. The room went deathly quiet. Eleanor's hand moved toward the photo, her fingers twitching. She didn't look at the guests. She looked only at me, and for a second, the mask of the refined philanthropist vanished. The woman from the university was back, her eyes burning with a decades-old fire. "This is nonsense," she hissed. "A coincidental resemblance from a man who is clearly obsessed with the past." I didn't stop. I pulled out a stack of letters, the paper yellowed and brittle. I began to read. I read the part where Lori promised to haunt my future home. I read the part where she described how she would make sure any child I had would grow up to hate me. I read the words she had written in 1994, detailing a plan to find me again one day and take what was mine. And then I turned to the real evidence. I pulled out a set of logs from the private investigator. Mark, did you ever wonder why you just happened to meet Abby at that specific legal forum in Boston? Did you wonder why the hotel had lost your reservation, forcing you to sit at the same table as her in the lounge? Mark looked at the papers. His brow furrowed as he read the names of the people Eleanor had paid to coordinate those chance encounters. He saw the payments to a firm that specialized in background checks, dated 2 years before he ever met Abby. He saw his own life laid out as a series of transactions. Eleanor was breathing hard now, her composure crumbling. "You think you can come into my home and do this, after what your daughter did?" She turned to the room, her voice rising to a shriek. "Ask him about his precious daughter. Ask her about the crimes she committed. Ask her why she is terrified of me." Abby let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. This was the moment Eleanor had been waiting for. She thought that by exposing Abby's mistake, she would win. She thought the shame would drive me away and keep Abby under her thumb forever. I walked over to my daughter and put my hand on her shoulder. "Abby, look at me." She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to lose the baby." I turned back to Eleanor. "I already know, Eleanor. I know about the prescription fraud. I know about the mistake she made when she was young and scared and under too much pressure. And here's the thing you forgot. I spent 35 years as a high school principal. I know how to deal with bullies, and I know how the law works when it comes to malicious intent." I pulled out one final set of papers. These were from a lawyer I had consulted. "Eleanor, what you have been doing is called extortion. It is a felony. You didn't just find those records, you used them to coerce a mother into abandoning her family. That folder you have? It is no longer a weapon against Abby. It is the primary evidence in a criminal case against you." I looked at the guests, the elite of the town, who were now looking at Eleanor with pure disgust. They were seeing the monster behind the pearls. But the real blow came from Mark. He stood up, looking at the mother he had adored his entire life. He looked at the woman who had treated his wife like a pawn, and his marriage like a long-term investment. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Did you plan us? Did you set me up to meet her just to get back at him?" Eleanor reached for his hand, her face contorting into a mask of desperation. "I did it for you, Mark. I found you a perfect woman. I ensured you would have a legacy." "You didn't find me a woman," Mark said, pulling his hand away as if she were made of poison. "You found me a victim, and you used me to hurt her." He turned to Abby, who was still crying. He took her hand and pulled her up from the chair. "We are leaving," he said. "Now." Eleanor stood up, her chair crashing to the floor behind her. "You have nowhere to go. I have the records. I will call the police right now." "Go ahead," I said, stepping forward so I was inches from her face. "Call them. Tell them how you spent 2 years stalking a family and then used a sealed legal record to blackmail a new mother. Tell them how you orchestrated a marriage to satisfy a 30-year-old grudge. I have the paper trail, Eleanor. I have the private investigator's report. I have the letters. If you want to go to court, we can go. But you won't be the one sitting in the witness stand. You will be the one in the dock." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor looked around the room, searching for a single ally, a single person who would stand by her. But every face was turned away. Her empire of influence had vanished in the span of 20 minutes. Mark walked over to the sideboard, grabbed the leather folder, and handed it to me. Then he took his wife's arm and led her toward the door. I stayed for a moment, looking at the woman who had tried to steal my life. I pulled the silver rattle from my pocket and set it on the table in front of her. It looked beautiful under the chandelier light, a symbol of a family that had survived far worse than her. This stayed in my family for 4 generations, I said quietly. It was never going to be yours, Lori. It was never meant for your house. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back at the shouting or the sounds of guests rushing for the exit. I walked out into the cool night air, feeling the weight of 30 years finally lifting off my shoulders. When I reached the driveway, Mark and Abby were waiting by their car. The baby was in the back seat, sleeping through the storm. Abby ran to me and threw her arms around my neck, sobbing into my shoulder. I held her tight, the way I had when she was a little girl afraid of the dark. "It is over, honey," I whispered. "She can't hurt you anymore." But as we stood there, the front door of the mansion swung open. Eleanor stood on the porch, her hair disheveled, her silhouette framed by the light of the house she had lost. She didn't scream this time. She just watched us. And in the moonlight, I saw her hand reach for her phone. This was a woman who didn't know how to lose. I knew that the battle was won, but the war of a desperate woman is never truly over. Stay tuned for the final part of the story, where Eleanor makes one last, desperate attempt to reclaim her power, and I have to decide exactly how far I'm willing to go to protect my grandson's future. Will the law be enough to stop her? Or does a woman like Eleanor require a different kind of justice? The ending will leave you breathless. Do you think Eleanor has one more card to play, or is she truly finished? And what should Mark and Abby do now that their entire history has been revealed as a lie? My grandson was finally in my arms, and the weight of him was the only thing keeping me grounded as the police sirens began to wail in the distance. I thought the truth had set us free, but Eleanor was a woman who would rather see the world burn than admit she had lost. She was making her final move, and it was the most cold-blooded one yet. If you want to see how a father protects his legacy when everything is on the line, stay with me until the very last word of this journey. Before we reach the conclusion of this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. I want to know your honest opinion. Is there ever a point where you should stop seeking justice, or do you fight until the very end? Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful stories of family and truth. Predicting the ending now might be harder than you think, so leave your thoughts below. Part 3. The Long Shadow. The drive away from Eleanor's estate was a blur of rain and flashing lights. Mark sat in the driver's seat of his SUV, his knuckles white against the leather steering wheel. Beside him, Abby was huddled in her seat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead as if she expected the asphalt to swallow us whole. I sat in the back with my grandson, the silver rattle tucked safely in my pocket. The baby was sleeping, oblivious to the fact that his world had just been torn apart and put back together in the span of an hour. None of us spoke for a long time. The silence in the car was heavy, filled with the unspoken questions that would define the rest of our lives. Mark finally broke it as we crossed the county line. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice sounding older, more hollow. "We can't go back to the house. She has the keys. She has everything." "We are going to my house," I said firmly. "It isn't a mansion, but it is a fortress. And more importantly, she isn't allowed there." As we pulled into my driveway, the reality of the situation began to settle. We were a family in hiding from the woman who was supposed to be their matriarch. I led them inside, making up the guest room for Abby and the baby while Mark paced the living room. I could see the conflict in him. He had just discovered that his mother was a criminal, a stalker, and a master manipulator who had treated him like a tool for 30 years. "Dad," Abby whispered as I walked her into the kitchen for a glass of water, "she is going to do it. She is going to call the district attorney. She won't care if it ruins Mark or the baby's future. She just wants to win." I sat her down at the table, the same table where she used to do her homework. "Abby, listen to me. Eleanor thinks she is the only person who can use the past as a weapon. But the past is a heavy thing, and she has been carrying far more than she realized. I didn't just bring those letters tonight to embarrass her. I brought them to show her that I haven't been idle for 30 years either. The next morning, the storm broke. Not the weather, but the legal reality. My phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Miller, the private investigator. "Mr. Henderson, you need to turn on the local news." She did it. She didn't even wait for the sun to come up. I turned on the television. There was a reporter standing outside the courthouse. A prominent local philanthropist, Eleanor Vance, had released a statement regarding an ongoing investigation into professional misconduct and fraud involving a former associate. She didn't name Abby directly, but the details were specific enough that anyone in the legal community would know exactly who she was talking about. It was a scorched earth policy. Eleanor was willing to destroy her daughter-in-law's career and her son's reputation just to prove she still held the power. Mark came into the room, his face ashen as he watched the broadcast. "She really did it," he whispered. "She is actually trying to put the mother of her grandchild in prison." Abby came down the stairs a moment later, clutching the baby to her chest. She saw the TV and stopped, her face going completely still. It was the look of a woman who had reached the end of her fear and had moved into something much colder. "She thinks she is the only one who can play this game," Abby said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But I am a lawyer. I was trained by the best, and ironically, she was the one who paid for my final year of law school." We spent the next 4 hours at my kitchen table, which had turned into a war room. We weren't just looking for a way to defend Abby, we were looking for the kill shot. We needed something that would not just stop Eleanor, but ensure she could never speak our names again. I reached out to the contact I had mentioned before, the retired professor from our university days. His name was Dr. Aris, and he had been the dean of students back when Lori was a student. I had spoken to him briefly during my week of preparation, but now I needed the full story he had hinted at. I put him on speakerphone. "Dr. Aris, this is Arthur Henderson. It is time. I need to know what happened the night Lori left the university." The old man's voice was shaky but clear. "Arthur, I have kept this secret for 30 years because her family paid a lot of money to the university's endowment to make it go away. But after what I saw in the news this morning, I cannot stay silent. Lori didn't just leave because you broke up with her. She left because she was caught." "Caught doing what?" Mark asked, leaning in close to the phone. "She had been systematically forging the signatures of the faculty to alter her grades and those of her competitors," Dr. Aris explained. "But that wasn't the worst of it. When she realized she was going to be expelled, she tried to set fire to the administration building to destroy the evidence. Her father intervened, moved her to a private sanitarium, and changed her identity. They wiped her record clean with a massive donation and a series of non-disclosure agreements. Eleanor Vance doesn't legally exist. She is a construct built on arson and fraud." The room went silent. We didn't just have a case of extortion. We had the origin story of a monster. I looked at Mark. "Your mother's entire life is a lie, Mark. Every contract she has signed, every board she has sat on, every tax return she has filed under the name Eleanor Vance is technically a fraudulent act because that identity was never legally established through the proper channels. She just started using it, and with enough money, people stopped asking questions. We didn't go to the police first. We went to Eleanor. We drove back to the mansion that afternoon. The gates were closed, but Mark had the remote. We drove up the long driveway, which was now littered with the debris from the abandoned party. The house looked different now. Not like a palace, but like a hollow shell. We walked into the foyer. Eleanor was sitting in the dark in the living room, a bottle of expensive scotch on the table next to her. She didn't look up when we entered. "Did you see the news, Arthur?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I told you I would ruin you. I told you 30 years ago." I walked over and turned on the lamp. "It is over, Lori," I said, using her real name. She flinched at the sound of it. "My name is Eleanor Vance." "No, it isn't," Mark said, stepping forward. Your name is Lori Miller. You are an expelled student, an arsonist, and a fraud. And every document you have used to blackmail my wife is now being handed over to the authorities along with the testimony of Dr. Aris. Eleanor turned to look at her son, her eyes wide. You wouldn't. I am your mother. You were a director, Mark said, his voice hard. You were a woman who bought a son and a daughter-in-law to satisfy a grudge. You aren't a mother. You are a ghost. I laid out the papers on the coffee table. These are the documents from the university. These are the records of the fire. And here is the best part, Lori. Because you never legally changed your name, the trust funds you set up, the property you own, and the accounts you have used to control everyone around you are all under legal scrutiny. You didn't just try to ruin Abby's career, you have invalidated your own existence. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard. Eleanor looked at the papers, her hands beginning to shake. The power she had held over us for years was gone. It had been built on a foundation of sand, and the tide had finally come in. We have a deal for you, Abby said, stepping forward. She looked like the formidable attorney she was meant to be. You will retract your statement to the press immediately. You will sign a full confession of your extortion attempts. You will transfer the deed of this house and all your local assets to a trust for your grandson. And then you will leave. You will move to the house your family bought for you 30 years ago, and you will never, ever contact us again. If you so much as look in our direction, we will hand everything to the federal authorities. Eleanor looked at us, and for the first time, I saw her as she truly was. She wasn't a powerful socialite. She was a broken, bitter woman who had wasted 3 decades of her life on a hate that didn't even remember its own cause. She had built a cage for herself and called it a kingdom. She signed the papers. She didn't say a word as she did it. She looked like she had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. As we walked out of the house for the last time, Mark stopped at the front door. He looked back at the woman sitting in the shadows. Goodbye, Lori, he said quietly. We drove away, and this time there were no sirens. There was only the sound of the wind through the trees and the quiet breathing of the baby in the back seat. The fallout was significant, but we handled it together. Abby's firm, once they saw the evidence of the extortion and the truth about Eleanor, stood by her. She had to go through a period of probation, but her career was saved. Mark took over the management of the estate assets, ensuring that his mother was cared for in a quiet, secluded facility far away from our lives. But he never visited her. He couldn't. I returned to my quiet house on the edge of town. But it isn't so quiet anymore. Every weekend, the driveway is full. Mark and Abby are there, and my grandson is growing faster than I can keep up with. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch with Abby, I pulled the silver rattle from my pocket. I handed it to her. Give this to him when he is old enough to understand, I said. Understand what, Dad? She asked, looking at the silver glinting in the twilight. Understand that a family isn't something you can build with money or lies, I said. It is something you protect with the truth, no matter how much it hurts. We sat there in the fading light, watching the fireflies dance over the lawn. The long shadow of the past had finally vanished, replaced by the bright, clear light of a future we had earned. Eleanor was gone, a footnote in a story she thought she owned. And as I watched my grandson take his first wobbling steps on the grass, I knew that the 30-year war was finally over. I had won, not because I was stronger, but because I had something she could never understand. A love that was real. Do you think Eleanor deserved a second chance? Or was her exile the only way to ensure the family's safety? And if you were Mark, would you ever be able to forgive your father for keeping the secret of his mother's identity for so long? Thank you for following this journey with me.
My grandpa's worst really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.